It's not very strange to receive a phone call from your girlfriend until you remember that she died 12 months ago. I thought the first phone call was a prank. It was impossible for the dead to call, but when I picked up the receiver, her voice was on the other end. Shelley didn't ask for help or anything cliché. She spoke about her day, as if we hadn't all attended her funeral hours before. When I yelled through the tears, I knew that anyone would pull such a cool prank. Her voice was genuinely confused. She didn't seem to understand why I would say she was dead, or why I kept insisting the call was impossible. The second phone call came the next night, and with the same results. By the third, I was a bit more willing to listen, but I knew it couldn't be Shelley. I just wanted to find out who was behind such a heartless act and make it stop. I loved her, and I mourned her, and someone found humor in that pain. How could people be so sick? Shelley would have thought so too. She was always so kind, so gentle, and far too young to have been taken. We think life in terms of ages, with the young becoming old and finally passing away. The truth is that life has no such rules. By the fifth night, I found myself talking to the person claiming to be Shelley with ease that surprised me. Somehow, the person not only managed her voice and mannerisms, they also knew details that no one but Shelley should know. Within a week, I was convinced. Somehow, Shelley was calling me. I cried when the realization really set in. Maybe I was just losing my mind, but I didn't care. My grief was so strong that I was willing to take a ghost or a hallucination if it meant not losing the person I loved the most. Maybe I could prove Shelley really was behind the cause. If someone else listened in, they would hear her, and then I would have my proof. So, on week 2, I asked a mutual friend to spend the night, but when 9 o'clock came and went without the call, I decided on another plan. I tried to record the phone calls, but when I tried to play them back, there was only static. So, I was crazy. I was losing my mind. The next night, I didn't pick up the call, but by the next, I was unable to stop myself. I had to hear her voice. I had to hear about her day, even if I knew the day she would describe was impossible. 6 weeks went by, and I stopped trying to prove Shelley was more than a figment of my imagination. I was selfish with her attention, and even if I knew her stories were fake, what did it matter? She sounded so happy when she relayed a happy moment, and so angry when complaining about a grievance someone committed against her. I found myself laughing along with her. Somehow, I had her back. Maybe I couldn't see her, but it was her beautiful voice ringing into my ear, a sound as beautiful as any bell. She'd refuse with some excuse when I asked to meet with her, but even that didn't matter. It was Monday of that week when she said something that confused me. I hope Jane's leg is alright. It looked like a terrible fall. Jane was a close friend of Shelley's, but we also had some college classes together, and Jane's leg had been fine that day. I asked her what she meant, but her story remained vague, no matter how hard I pushed. All she would say is that she hoped it would heal well. The poor thing had been so twisted. Since our classes were held every other day, I didn't have the class I shared with Jane until Wednesday. That day, she wasn't in class. When I asked around, I heard that Jane had fallen down the steps of a nearby building and had been hurt. Specifically, her leg had been so badly twisted that it would be a wonder if she would ever be able to walk without assistance. No one else had any other details. not even on what had caused the fall. Shelley had predicted it. Jane was on heavy painkillers when I went by to visit, so I promised to come another day and left her to rest. That night, when Shelley called, I asked her how she knew Jane would be injured, but again, the question seemed to just confuse her. Predict what? She got hurt before we spoke yesterday. Was Shelley not only dead, but in my future? The idea seemed ridiculous, but could I really dismiss the thought when I was talking to a ghost? Surely Jane's injury was proof that Shelley was real. I had never been able to even accurately guess test answers. I wasn't suddenly predicting these events myself. But Shelley had described her days in detail to me before, and none of the others had come true. Why now? Why this specific event? I pushed it from my mind. Jane healed slowly, but it seemed that she had simply tripped and fallen down the stairs. It was a horrible incident to be sure, but nothing paranormal, nothing malicious. I never told anyone Shelley had predicted it. No one would believe me. Already, I doubted my own sanity despite the now nightly phone calls. I stopped going out at night, and my friends started to worry. Shelley and I would meet with people nearly every night, and it was easy to blame my sudden urge to be secluded on the depression I must have fallen into after her death. No one suspected that I was still speaking with her every night. The next event happened 2 months later, 6 months after her death. As always, we were talking about her make-believe day when once more her voice grew concerned. The fire was so bright. For a moment, I thought she was talking about hell, and I panicked. I relaxed when she continued, but only until the realization hit. The Marshalls have lived in that home since I was a kid. Now, it's all gone. They were so devastated. There had been no fire. The Marshall's house was down the street from mine, and it still stood intact. I wanted to shrug it off as another fictional part of a day that couldn't exist. But after Jane's accident, I couldn't. As long as I wanted to keep talking to her, I had to warn them. She was just as reluctant to let me go. But Shelley believed me when I told her I felt unwell. Somehow, it felt wrong to lie to her, but I couldn't be so selfish. Immediately, I ran to their house. There was no sign of fire, no trace of even a single flame. The air was void of ash, and even sniffing brought nothing concerning. Still, I knocked. Henry Marshall answered the door, his face kind and welcoming. He invited me in and had enough patience to answer most of my questions. Had they had trouble with their wiring? How were their smoke alarms? Did they know that a lot of fires started by appliances that had been left plugged in? Even through his obvious confusion, he humored me. When none of his answers led to an obvious clue as to how a fire would start, I finally blurted out the truth. Shelley had told me there would be a fire. The confusion melted from his face and was replaced with a look of concern. I know you're hurting, but son, you know Shelley isn't with us. Have you been sleeping? Have you thought about seeing the doctor? He didn't believe me. I couldn't blame him since I wouldn't have believed myself if I hadn't heard her voice. Still, I insisted that it was true. Their house would catch fire, My yelling got so loud that he asked me to leave, after begging me to call a friend or my parents. I stood outside their house, watching, as if I could catch the moment the flame started. Of course, nothing happened within the hour. Maybe nothing would. He said his alarms were all working. Shelley had only accurately predicted Jane's injury. I left at midnight. My legs were tired and my eyes heavy. I'd check back the next day. I promised myself I would have to sleep eventually, but I could return with a rested eye. The fire was on the news the next morning. It happened only 2 hours after I left. Thankfully, everyone made it out safely, but I was still stunned as I watched the footage on the news. As Shelley had predicted, the house sat engulfed by flames. I shut my eyes tightly, as if I could undo the image. Was this my fault? I hadn't started the fire, but I hadn't been able to stop it, despite the warning. Shelley had tried to help me, but I had missed the opportunity. Even in death, her selflessness remained. The police came that day. Of course they would. I had warned them about a fire, just hours before one had started. Still, I wasn't too worried. They could find the internal cause soon enough, and it would be obvious that I couldn't be connected. At most, they would think I was harmlessly insane. I answered their questions with that in mind, before 3 words shook my entire world. We suspect arson. Arson? Someone intentionally set the fires? The officer had to ask the next question 3 times before it managed to get through the fog that was covering my brain. Who? Had they been there when I sat watching the house? What did they have against the marshals? If Shelley had seen it, maybe she could see the person behind the act too. When the police finally left with the warning to stay nearby, I hurried to my phone. Shelley never called before 9, so it was a fruitless motion, but I hoped I could will the phone to ring earlier. It didn't. 9 o'clock, as if the dead couldn't call before then. I answered on the first ring and told her what happened, remembering to phrase it as if it had happened the day before. She talked with the same somber tone, but unfortunately, she didn't know the culprit either. No amount of urging changed her mind or brought any details to light. She seemed to know only what was reported on the news. 2 disasters. Shelley had predicted both, and I had been unable to stop either. The guilt ate me up, and I began to sleep even less. Something inside of me began to dread the cause. I loved Shelley, but I feared another prediction I would be unable to prevent. I wanted the thoughts to be like they were, void of anything disastrous. My blessing had become a curse. 5 more months passed. I wish I could say I forgot about the fire that was never solved, but I didn't. I kept waiting for the next clue, the next hint. I was a bit more optimistic that I could stop the next one, but instead, I missed the clue altogether. Jonathan was going to visit today. He changed his mind. I could have pushed, but I decided not to. It was a bit unlike Shelley. Normally, she was more respectful of someone's decision and wouldn't push if someone was in the mood to visit. Even more strange was the fact that Jonathan was going to visit when I hadn't been allowed to. Still, it was a normal part of someone's day, and we often talked about the mundane. Later, When I heard that Jonathan had called the hospital after intentionally taking too many pills, the two were easy to connect. I should have realized sooner, but hindsight does little to change the past. But something was odd about the wording. What did Shelley mean when she said she could have pushed? It was chilling enough to realize that almost dying meant almost visiting her. But did that mean Shelley could have assured he did die? How? Did Shelley have that power? Did she secretly know she was dead? Again, my questioning led nowhere. Instead, she grew upset and ended the call. For the first time since the first conversation, didn't call the next day. As I sat, waiting for the phone to ring, another horrifying thought ran through my head. Even thinking it felt like a betrayal, but the worry was like an infection. Jane's phone rang twice before she picked up with the usual introduction. After the pleasantries were out of the way, I finally managed to ask the question that was plaguing my mind. That day you hurt your leg, were you pushed? I heard her inhale before she answered. No, that would be impossible. Nobody was there. There was doubt in her voice. My heart beat so fast that I thought it would burst from my chest, but I didn't back down. Even though it was impossible, did it feel like something pushed you? The silence stretched so long that I thought the call might have ended, but finally, her voice returned, small and frightened. Nobody was there, but I felt hands on my back. The blood stopped flowing through my veins. The rapid pounding stopped, as if my body had decided it couldn't function anymore. Jane had been pushed, and someone had set the marshal's house on fire. Jonathan's attempted suicide hadn't seemed coerced, but Shelley said she could have pushed it. Did she only know that because she'd managed to push things before? As of today, it's been 12 months. Before tonight, Shelley had stopped calling. I assumed it was over, but I didn't know if I was disappointed or relieved. I got my answer when the phone rang at 9, and my heart dropped into my stomach. It was hard to force my hand to the receiver to lift it from the base. When I heard her voice, I immediately asked her why she was hurting those she cared about. The phone call has been over for an hour now, and her answer won't leave my mind. What are you talking about? I wouldn't even hurt my enemy. But I'm so excited that I finally get to see you tomorrow.